What's going on, guys? Welcome back. And since we are now approaching the 1 year anniversary of the release of Spider-Man Far From Home and the 3 year anniversary of the release of Spider-Man Homecoming. And I've been really mixed on my thoughts on Far From Home for the last year. I really liked it upon release, and my thoughts have changed on it. Now, it is easily my favorite Marvel movie of last year. The only competition it has is Captain Marvel and Endgame, which, in my opinion, are both way worse than Far From Home. And I will let you know what my number grade would be for each movie. I love Homecoming. I actually love it. It's one of my favorite MCU movies. It's really well written, really funny, and it is a good Spider-Man story in my opinion. I give it an 8 out of 10. The Far From Home is very mixed for me. I think there's some elements that are good. The writing is a lot worse. The humor is a lot worse in my opinion. But they did do some interesting things with the characters, although they weren't always executed the best in my opinion. So I would give Far From Home as a number grade. I'd give it like around a 5.5 or a 6. Now we're gonna get into my real thoughts here. So I've given you kind of a quick recap of what I think of both the movies. Now, I like all the main things I really love about Far From Home come from it as a standalone film, which it isn't. I know that both these films have important pieces in the overall Marvel Cinematic Universe other than just being a connected trilogy or however long they're going to extend the Tom Holland Spider-Man film series. But as a sequel, Far From Home is pretty bad. It's not a bad movie, but as a sequel, it is not very good. It does not continue the ideas well from the first one. Now, I've got to kind of talk about different types of sequels. So, we've got the Lord of the Rings trilogy, right? Which is a trilogy that is about one story, but there are different plot elements introduced in each film. The main thread running throughout all of them is, of course, destroying the ring. The Hobbit trilogy is actually not. There's no different story introduced in each film because it is a trilogy about one story. The dwarves going to reclaim the mountain, and then they dragged out the Battle of the Five Armies for some reason, and that's easily the worst Middle-earth film, but that's not the topic of discussion for today. And then you have the original Tobey Maguire trilogy and the two-film Andrew Garfield series. Now, in the original Tobey Maguire series, there are different elements introduced in each film, such as Doc Ock, Sandman, who connects to Uncle Ben, and all that. The one thread running throughout that whole trilogy is Peter's relationship to MJ and Harry Osborn. Then in the new Andrew Garfield series, the way that the first Andrew Garfield film is left off is with Gwen Stacy's father dying and Peter feeling guilt towards that and worrying about losing Gwen. They carry that element through to the next film. They carry that plot thread, which is one of the main plot threads of the movie, and he ultimately loses Gwen. And it's very sad, but it is what he feared would happen. So that is a plot element that is continued. With Homecoming, they end off the film with two big kind of reveals or things that happen. And I can't blame these changes on a differing director. Most of the time when the Marvel movies have inconsistent storytelling, it is because of different directors being brought in for each film, such as the Captain America movies, the Iron Man movies with Jon Favreau directing the first two, and then Shane Black directing a third one. These two films, Homecoming and Far From Home, are both directed by John Watts. So, I can't blame it on the director. I just want to explain that the inconsistent storytelling cannot be excused because it is the same director. They just didn't think about this. So, I will break it down for you. At the end of Homecoming, Aunt May, so this is why I feel and why Far From Home, not even just why I feel, it's just bad storytelling, is that Far From Home is a bad sequel. I like it. It's not a bad movie, but it is a bad sequel. So let's start off. At the end of Homecoming, it's ended with Aunt May finding out that Peter is Spider-Man, and I'm not saying that they had to develop this and just keep it the same. Like, Aunt May's worried. Because Aunt May in most stories is just worried, and that's not really the most interesting concept. They did a good job with her in the original Sam Raimi movies by having her be very inspiring and be like a main part of Peter's life. And she's a well-written character in Homecoming. Although she is not a major character, Aunt May has always been a supporting character, and she was well-written in Homecoming. You don't realize all these events that are happening, like the Washington Monument accident with the elevator and the ferry accident, that she believes Peter is like involved in all these somehow, and she's really worried about him. All these things are happening around them, and she's extremely worried about him. And it does make you think about kind of these characters, that Peter is very important to her, and she was really worried about him. In the second film, it opens and she's just completely on board with him being Spider-Man. She loves it. She's happy. She wants him to do it. She doesn't care at all that he's risking his life every day, and that's bad writing. They left off on a cliffhanger. It was kind of a joke, but it also did lend itself to interesting stories that could be told in the future. Rather, John Watts just decided to let her be a comedic side character, and they didn't develop that plot point that they left off, that thread. So that's one thread that was cut. The second thread is the Vulture in the prison at the end of the first film. Matt Gargan, or the Scorpion, comes up to him in prison and says, "I've heard you know who Spider-Man is." And Vulture responds by saying, "If I knew who he was, he would already be dead." So that means he's either sparing Peter's life for his own selfish gain, and he wants to go after him himself when he gets out of prison, or he's sparing his life because he saved his life at the end of Homecoming, and he has a certain level of respect for Peter for doing that. I believe it's the latter. I believe he is doing it out of respect for Peter, but that's just my take on it. At the end of Far From Home, the main part that everyone's praising is the post-credit scene, or the mid-credit scene, where Mysterio reveals Peter's identity to the world, and you brought back J.K. Simmons, and that's great. That's awesome. I'm glad they brought him back, and I like that idea in the movie, because my buddy Sick Bricks here on YouTube actually pointed out to me that the Even Dead I'm the Hero acronym for Edith does actually have a double meaning, not just for Tony, but also for Quentin Beck, because he deceived the world into believing that he was the hero and that Spider-Man was the villain. That's some cool storytelling. But it doesn't work as a sequel, because you left off the first film with Vulture. Vulture is not mentioned. He doesn't show up at all in Far From Home. And the Vulture, that whole plot line about him keeping his identity a secret is just, it doesn't exist anymore, because now everyone knows he's Spider-Man anyway. The whole world does. So it doesn't mean anything anymore. The Vulture keeping his identity a secret doesn't mean anything at all. It could be interesting to see him team up with Peter, like they're buddies and they're on the run or something like that. That would be kind of a cool concept for a movie. But you can't develop it anymore, because you've just ruined it. Like, there's no way they can develop this. Everyone knows he's Spider-Man now, so Vulture keeping his identity a secret is now rendered pointless as a result of this twist, which works well in the Far From Home movie. But I can't really give it credit too much, because it is a sequel, and as a sequel, it doesn't do what it should do. Another plot thread that is set up in Homecoming is MJ liking Peter. The problem is this film starts with Peter just liking MJ. If they had developed at some point in Far From Home, or in Homecoming, that he liked MJ or had a crush on MJ, or he was starting to develop feelings for her, and she was developing feelings for him, and then he has to break up with Liz at the end of the movie, and it's kind of better for both of them because he likes MJ now, and she has to move. Something like that could have been more interesting. But they just start the second movie, and we got a feeling that MJ liked Peter, but now they have to write in this weird part where he's just like, I love MJ, I like MJ, and I'm gonna do this, I have this plan. And it's like, where did this come from? Like, he didn't really seem to care at all about MJ. She was just this weird background character that no one really gave a crap about. But now, he just likes MJ for some reason. If they'd established that at some point in the first film, that would have led into the second better. So maybe that's just them not thinking well enough about it. But the Vulture getting undercut by Mysterio's reveal of Peter's identity, and the Aunt May part is really the nail in the coffin for me. Far From Home is an enjoyable, watchable movie. I like it a lot more than I remember, and every time I watch it, it's fun, and I really do like it. But it doesn't serve its purpose as a sequel. A sequel is supposed to introduce new ideas and expand upon the first. This film introduces a ton of new ideas and explores the ideas in its own movie. It doesn't continue the story from the first film. I don't know what to blame for that, because it's the same director. There's no reason why they shouldn't have continued this. They just didn't think about it. Now everyone knows he's Spider-Man. The Vulture scene is pointless. Now Aunt May is completely okay with him being Spider-Man. That is rendered pointless. They should have thought about it more when writing the sequel, and that's why I don't get why so many people love Far From Home. Because sure, it's a decent movie. It's fun. There's good actors. Jake Gyllenhaal is good as Mysterio. It's just, I have a ton of problems with it, but the biggest problem with it is why I feel Far From Home is not a good sequel. It's a fun movie. It's not nearly as good as the first one if you're just looking at them as movies. But as a consecutive series, I hope they do a better job with continuing the storylines from Far From Home in the next film than they did here, because it's awful here. The storytelling, continued from Homecoming to Far From Home, is awful. Far From Home is a good movie, or a fun movie. It's not a good sequel. That is my breakdown of Far From Home and why I feel it is a bad sequel. Feel free to disagree. Tell me in the comments your opinion on this video and what you think. Like, what's your take on it? Do you think it was a good sequel? Whatever your thoughts are, please let me know them all in the comments below. And of course, as always, I hope you guys have a great day. Take care.